flicky. This is one of the most invaluable pieces, when you're a presenter, the flicky, because it allows you to walk around. Good morning. Thank you to come to listen about standards. Standards have been a bit of a bugbear, for me for the last few years. I've been in this industry for the last 30 years, and obviously I've seen the development of typography or type design, from the early days of the Macintosh, etc. And I've seen that, like, everyone is always doing things their own way. And I'm not sure that it is necessarily a good thing. So this is a statement. And one of the other statements I usually do when I do talks at universities is I say to students, you are designers, you are not artists, you have a job to do. Yeah. And I think it's also worthwhile remembering that we work for customers, and the customers need to have a good experience. That experience is either a service experience or a product experience. Now, as type designers and font engineers, font makers, we actually make products that someone is going to use. So we should really make sure, as an industry, as individuals and as an industry, that our products follow certain standards so that there is a good user experience. Now, let's go back a few hundred years. In the early days of hot metal type, all the various type foundries, they used their own letter types, on different body heights and so on and so forth, and the printers had to consistently adjust the beds of their printing machine in order to fit the various types from the various foundries. Now, eventually, around the 17th century, someone had the idea, well, let's standardize heights of characters so that the printers don't continuously have to mess around with their printing presses, which made everything much more efficient and more consistent. It's a good idea. Then Dido introduced the Dido point, and then, of course, the Americans and the English, they did their own thing, introduced the pico point, messing up the standard system. But that's another thing, because the French and the British had never a really good relationship, and they still don't, which is why we have Brexit, but that's another question. Now, anyway, and then comes 1989, Unicode 1.1. Hoorah! I think this is probably for the type industry the best standardization thing that ever happened, because I am old enough to remember that when you created fonts, multilingual fonts, and when I'm saying multilingual, I'm talking in Western and Eastern European fonts, multilingual fonts that you did not have consistency across Macintosh and PC. What a nightmare. Unicode solves this. Magic. It's a standard. It's a good thing. It helps us produce better quality fonts. But let's just talk a little bit about what standards do, particularly for our clients. They create predictability, meaning that if a client buys something, they know exactly what they're going to get, and they know it is going to work within a certain set of parameters. That's a good thing. As a client, imagine, as a client, you're a designer, you're a senior designer, an art director, or whatever, you are under massive pressure to deliver this massive corporate identity or book project or whatever it is. You bind the font, and then you have these nasty surprises because your expectations of what the font is supposed to do aren't met. Imagine if you have standards on certain things where you know exactly what you're going to get, and with full confidence you can buy that product. And it's great. That's a good thing. It also means it is consistency. If you have standardized fonts, and we will talk a little bit later about what these standards could be, as a user of these fonts, be that a retail user or a custom font user, you can then switch fonts and know that your languages aren't being messed up. Your open type features aren't being messed up because you know what the product is. You know what you're buying into, which all results into happiness. Happy clients come back to you and give you more money. That's a good thing. Now, but what do standards do for us as an industry? Well, first of all, it allows us to have more clarity. It allows us to communicate with our customers with clarity. We can educate and inform our customers as to what they are going to get and why they should have this. And it's a consistent approach. For us, it also means less support. You have a standardized product. Customers know what they're going to get. Their expectations are being met, which means you don't have to support it. Now, if the customer has a specific request that you have to support, you can add that as a service. Whether you provide that service for free or charge for it, that's entirely up to you. But it's a good thing. You know exactly what you need to do. And that means you save money, which means for us, as individuals or as companies, we have more profit. We can invest that profit into new products, into bonuses, Caribbean islands, things like that. So that's a good thing. But for us also, in terms of more clarity, it allows us as an industry to develop clear processes and tool chains. So right from the start, when you design a new font, because you have the standards, you know what you're designing for. You don't have to worry about, okay, do I now need to support Swahili or not? It doesn't really matter because you're working toward a standard. You could now argue and say, well, but I want to support Swahili. Yeah, you can do that, but make it an extra feature. Don't use it as the standard. Make it on request, which is something that you can charge for. Work on a standard. But let's also talk a little bit about what standards don't do. The first one is it does not limit creativity. A lot of people think that the moment you have a standard, that you're stifled. That's not true. Frankly, I don't care what your letters look like as long as they follow the setup of the letters and the characters that you have and the slots that you're setting and how you're setting up your Unicodes, as long as that follows a standard. What is in the slot? I really don't care. If your customer is happy with that, brilliant, good for you. It also doesn't dictate aesthetics. If you want to have a typeface that is super tightly spaced with super wide kerning, brilliant, it's up to you. But as long as it follows a standard, and it certainly does not restrict competition. I've had conversations in the past about saying, okay, let's do open type standards in the sense and standardize, what features are in a font, or standardize what characters you have in a font. And they said, yeah, but that restricts competition because I want to give my client something extra and stuff. Yeah, you can do that, but make it a service. It's actually a good thing. Have a standard product, a standard service that you're selling, and if the client wants something else, you can add that to it as an extra, as a customization. That's a good thing. But let's talk a little bit about a few examples to illustrate what I mean by standards. And actually, I think the three major ones that I can think of off the top of my head are the font name descriptors, open type features, and character sets. So I've taken there's a disclaimer here. So I've taken a few examples from various foundries, how they're treating their things. So this is not about criticizing the individual foundry. This is purely to highlight the state of the union. Pro, com, and next. This is a linotype stroke monotype convention. Now, again, I am not criticizing what they're doing. I'm just merely questioning, is the approach right? And if it is right, what could they have done better? Now, let's look at Sabon here. On the right, we have a Latin standard. On the left, we have Latin extended, the Pro font. Standard font, Pro font. It just says Sabon. Now, when you look at it, they seem to have pretty much the same fractions, but the language coverage is different between the two. Now, if I'm thinking of Pro, that means it's a Pro user. The Pro user may want to have extended language coverage, but mainly a Pro user would want to have extra typographic features. So why is it then that the typographic features between the two are the same, but the languages are expanded? Does not quite make sense to me. Let's change it to Sabon Next, which is also a Pro font. Now, with the description next, I get that. It's a different design. They have messed around with it, and it's maybe better, it's maybe not so good, but that's irrelevant. But what they have now done is label both in Pro, and you get different sets of features, and you even get different sets of languages as well. So that is confusing to the user. Expectations are not being met. So I'm buying Sabon Pro, and then I'm upgrading, getting Sabon Next, and things are slightly different. That's not a good user experience, in my opinion. And then we have in Sabon Next, COM. What the hell is COM? Yeah. The fonts are exactly the same. If you look at the features, exactly the same. The language coverage seems to be pretty much the same. Now, I just happen, because I'm a type industry insider, I happen to know what COM means. It's a true type font, and it's hinted. That's it. Now, imagine you are an art buyer, or the art buyer, or like the purchase department of a big corporate, and you're looking at it, Latin Extended Pro, COM, Pro, COM. What do I do? What do I buy? I have no idea. So we need to start standardizing these expressions so that we can, first of all, communicate what these expressions or these descriptors mean, and then create, manage, and fulfill expectations on the user end. Now let's go back to Sabon Pro. So we have established what Pro means. Pro means a set of OpenType features plus a set of languages. So I bought Sabon, very happy with it, and then I go and buy Adobe Garament. And it's yet different again. Adobe uses Pro. So why on earth is it that when I buy a Pro font, I cannot have always the same thing? I cannot rely on the products to give me the same result if I switch the fonts. For me as a user of type, again, if you're a stressed-out creative director in an agency, that is a problem. And that really pisses me off, and I'll go back to Arial. Yeah? Let's talk a little bit about character sets and languages. This is one of our fonts. We support Eastern and Western European languages. And if you look at it, it's fairly extensive. I don't know, 100 languages, I have no idea. But we've established internally our standard, and all our library fonts within the Latin set adhere to that standard. So the client knows exactly what they want to buy. So that's from our foundry. That's a good thing. But here I'm showing Brie, so type together's font. And on the surface, it looks like they're pretty much supporting the same languages as we do. I had a cursory glance at the characters, and it seems to be pretty much the same thing. So again, that's a good thing. So language set expectations are being met. However, because there isn't a clear set standard for what languages should be supported, I cannot be 100% certain. Again, we have to start stepping outside our frame of mind and our knowledge of what languages are, and put ourselves in the shoes of a user potentially who is not that familiar with languages, with OpenType features, etc., and think from their point of view. If you have a standard that defines the languages that are supported in a font across all foundries in the industry, that is a good thing for the users, because they can go confidently buy the font and know they will not be disappointed. Here's another example from Type Network. Now, I understand in Type Network that there's different foundries that pull their fonts into the organization. But from a user experience point of view, this is total rubbish. One font supports Eastern and Western European languages, the other one is only Western European languages. Because I buy a font from Type Network, I don't buy the font from the individual designer. So my expectation is that all the fonts in Type Network support the same thing. I don't get that here. That's bad, in my opinion. And I think that creates a reputational issue for us as an industry, basically making us look like a bunch of incompetent fools. I think setting standards is also a great opportunity when it comes to now creating non-Latin fonts, and particularly I'm thinking of the complex script systems, Arabic, the various Indic ones. At the moment, many of you have been involved in non-Latin font development know it's pretty much Wild West out there. Everyone's doing their own thing. No one quite knows what glyph sets to support. Why can't we get together and actually start setting up standard glyph sets for complex writing systems? It would help us because it cuts down on research time. It would help the user. It would help everyone. In some areas, for example, Chinese, it has already been somewhat defined. We have the GB 2312, the GB 18030, etc., which define roughly what character sets there should be. But also, like, for example, another thing that have come about is vertical metrics. So these are the vertical metrics for this font from our library, Ossin. And to say, to a degree, we are as guilty as anyone else of maybe not always following standards that we should have. And the vertical metrics for active grotesque. They're different. Now, from a design point of view, it makes sense that they're different because they're different designs, they have different heights, and so on and so forth. But again, imagine yourself as a user, particularly as a web developer. Varying vertical metrics is an absolute nightmare because it messes up potentially your web layouts. A lot of people would like to have consistent vertical metrics because then they can just switch fonts without layouts being messed up. And we have another font again from Type Together, another example of kind of like an inconsistency across fonts for vertical metrics. So is there not an opportunity here for us as an industry to say, okay, could we establish, theoretically, a set of vertical metrics that is the same for all fonts, irrespective of who is producing them? So you have those parameters, and then you fit everything into those parameters. I don't think that it would limit creativity or aesthetics. It's just a thought. I think it's an important thing that we need to start thinking about. There is already some initiatives that are working toward standardization. Obviously, Google, with their Google fonts, have been working hard in creating really good quality fonts. And as part of that, they're sort of like starting to lay down certain rules for people who provide fonts to Google, what these fonts should contain, how they should be engineered, and so on and so forth. I think that's a good idea. There's a thing with an ATAPI specialist group that is talking about type design correction marks. Can we standardize those? That's a great initiative. Just imagine if every type designer uses the same correction marks. It means we can actually communicate with one another fairly seamlessly. So, am I delusional? Probably. I understand that standardization is not going to happen in my lifetime. I will be long dead, and many of us will be long dead before the type industry is actually agreeing on anything. But yet, I'm ever the optimist. There is collaboration, for example, with the variable fonts. I think variable fonts are a huge opportunity to start laying down standards for character sets, for open type feature support, naming conventions, because we're dealing with a new font format as such. So I think that's a good idea. We have data available that can tell us and guide us what these standards should look like. Google has all the data about language usages, which languages are used most. Well, let's use that data and actually make sensible sets for language support. We can agree on the data, and we can identify business opportunities for us through the data and how we set the standards and how that benefits the users. So I would like to invite you to talk about standards and think about it. Thank you.